So, how did I land in an education business? Well, by accident, really. Schools are communities, they're not just workplaces. Ownership really changes how you feel about a business. If you look after your people well, they'll look after your customers, and the numbers will then follow.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. Jen, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. Talk us through your career. How did you get into education business? What has your experience been in the sector? How did you end up owning an education business? What have been the really important steps along the way, the turning points in your career that have led you to this point?
Thanks so much for having me, Claire. I've been listening to your podcast for some time now, and I absolutely love hearing other people's stories. So it's a real privilege to be asked to join you. Thank you. It's actually 30 years this summer since I first set foot in EPM. And I'm not really one for reflecting, but 30 years in one business has flown by. And as someone who thrives off change and loves new and shiny things, it sometimes blows my mind to think that I've been in the same business for quite so long. When I look back, I realise, though, that no 2 years have been the same. There's always been equal measures of challenge and excitement. And I guess that's what's kept me interested. And there's been some huge changes in the education sector over that time, as we know. As well as being CEO of EPM, I also chair the board of our new education network called NEDx. I set that up last year. And also, until its sale at the end of last year, I also chaired the board of CF Group, which is an incredibly impactful education business in the alternative provision space. So I've seen education from several different angles over the years. I've also been through several different versions of ownership at EPM. Firstly, a management buyout, followed by a PE-backed trade sale. And then 2 years ago, had the incredible opportunity with my now business partner, Andy Mackey, to complete a second MBO, which is probably quite unusual. So a full circle moment for us really at EPM. So how did I land in an education business? Well, by accident, really. Back in 1996, I deferred my university place in response to an advert in the local paper. It just said, earn while you learn. Never heard of the business before. It was what we'd call a degree apprenticeship in today's terms. And my university degree was due to be just 12 hours a week of lectures. So I thought, I've got absolutely nothing to lose. I'll give it a go. Back then, EPM provided just HR services, so not the payroll services and wider services that we provide today, and just to schools in Cambridge and Peterborough. We're now supporting 2,000 schools across the whole of the country with much wider service offering. From a young age, I really loved the idea of working in business. I was really inspired by a super energetic business studies teacher and also my dad, who ran his own business. And from day one at EPM, I was always that person questioning why. Why were we doing things a certain way? I was always suggesting new ways of working. I was that annoying and slightly too gobby 19-year-old who thought they knew everything. Kind of know where my kids get it from now. But that approach seemed to go down quite well with the owners. And I'm not sure anyone had really challenged the status quo before I came along. Very quickly, I realised I absolutely loved the work. I particularly loved solving people problems, but I hated the rigidity of education HR procedures when we're dealing with humans. I just couldn't tolerate that. And I still can't bear it today. Schools are communities, they're not just workplaces. And people challenges are really complicated, emotional, and high stakes as well. The phrase kids just get one chance with their education really hooked me in. And I found myself being prepared to be bolder and riskier with my HR advice to get the right result for the school. I think the right teachers and the right leaders are so important to educational outcomes and organisational culture. And it takes a really brave leader to tackle some of those issues head on. So I was always really pleased to make a difference and to feel a real sense of purpose in helping schools get the right staffing in place. I dealt with some quite high profile cases at an early stage in my career. And then I was asked by the DfE to support with some of the very first academy conversion projects. So it was always new and exciting and a little bit scary at times, as there were probably far too many moments of making it up as you go along. But I quite liked that. And I soon realized that nobody knows everything and it didn't really matter. Spending 3 decades in one organization is probably really unusual these days and something I guess Generation Z will never experience, or possibly not experience. And I had a point early on in my career when I kind of absolutely panicked about pigeonholing myself. I was worried that education wasn't exciting or as glamorous as other industries, and that I was really limiting my career options by working in the public sector. So I left for a couple of years and worked in a much bigger business. I guess it's no surprise there was no glitz or glamour there either. And that time away, it turns out to be incredibly important to me, a really important experience. It showed me the opposite, that I wasn't really stuck in education, but I'd specialized in education. The complexity I'd experienced was actually quite rare. And I also loved the agility of working in a smaller business where you can have immediate impact. That really suited me much better than the bureaucracy of a larger organization. So when I returned to EPM 2 years later, I came back with a much clearer and much more intentional purpose around being part of an education business. And by my mid-20s, I'd got a master's degree in employment law and employee relations, plenty of HR experience under my belt, and without really noticing, I developed an expertise in education. Anyone who works in an education business will know that it's highly nuanced. And unless you've got that cheat sheet for the 100 acronyms that we have to use, and you're familiar with every paragraph of each of those different colour books, the burgundy book, the blue book, it's really hard to get on. I'd always wanted to feel part of the business and not just an employee. And I remember at one stage asking if I can invest my savings into the business, which didn't happen at the time. But after several years, I was offered an EPM share scheme, and eventually that led to the very first EPM management buyout. Now, that was a huge shift for me. I think ownership really changes how you feel about a business. You stop thinking about your job and you start thinking about the responsibility, the opportunity. You care deeply about the people in the business, the customers that are relying on you, and also thinking around how you future proof the business and looking constantly about what's going on around you. As we expanded at EPM, we brought in investors, and that taught me a huge amount about the financial side of running a business and disciplined growth. I was fascinated about how a business is viewed from the outside in. We were very used to looking at the sort of internal metrics of running a business and how to grow without losing your identity or diluting the quality of your service. Now, EPM is all about relationships, and having the right people was really key to scaling up our business. Initially, we ran the business with really quite simple metrics like, are we solvent? How much cash is in the bank? And we soon had to replace those with more sophisticated metrics like EBITDA percentages, gross profit margins, an obsession with double digit growth. But looking back, I'm really clear that you can distill it all down to some fairly simple concepts in a business like ours. If you look after your people well, they'll look after your customers and the numbers will then follow. It sounds easy, but I guess it's much more challenging in practice. So after being joint managing director of EPM for many years through our management buyout time, I was really delighted to be appointed to the newly created position of CEO at EPM in 2016. Now that was to prepare the business for a sale process, but also to allow the founding directors, who'd been incredibly supportive to me career-wise over the years, to exit the business and to shore the business up for the future in a sector that I could see was consolidating really fast. M&A activity was really high around us, and I was concerned about staying relevant as a standalone business. We were growing really well at EPM through word of mouth, and as we know, that's really powerful in education. But I was also adamant that to succeed longer term, we needed significant investment in new technology. We needed integrated software solutions and the very best people to provide the best service. And to me at that time, I think being part of something bigger felt right to me. So the sale to Citation Group was in 2017. It was one of the most exciting and eye-opening periods of my career, and I learned so much during that time. Financial and commercial diligence, for anyone that's been through those processes, it tests everything. It really helped me think about the longer term plan for the business, the infrastructure, the scale, the market opportunity, and all of those factors that perhaps in day-to-day running of the business you just don't need to consider. I met the most incredible people through that time. Our corporate finance advisors were superb. And the connections that I forged during that time were so important and definitely removed my EPM blinkers.
Wow, Jen, what an amazing story. Thank you for sharing so much. I'm still processing everything that you said. There were so many nuggets there. I'll definitely need to go back and listen to this again at another point. But just to pick up on one of the things that you mentioned, so you said that you basically helped get EPM ready for the founders to exit. And as a founder myself, that is interesting to me. And I talk to lots of founders. Some founders are solopreneurs. They've not really thought about that in the future, and they're probably just going to wind the business up at some point, which is fine. That's what they want to do. Then you have sort of those in the middle, which are maybe like me. They've got a small team and they got to a point where they realized, wait a minute, we could sell this thing at some point. But then you learn, oh, wait, though, there's quite a lot of things that you have to do to build value in your business so that an investor, for example, might find it useful, or another company would find it useful. And then you've got the entrepreneurs who are ahead of that. I don't really know very much about them because I'm not in that boat. But back to your story. What did you have to do in the business to change things? What changed in the people? What changed in the systems and processes, even in the products and services? What changed from being maybe more of a founder-led business to a business that could be sold so that the founders could exit?
Oh, great question. Well, I've been lucky enough to have seen this several times from different angles, selling and staying at EPM, then acquiring a business with founders who stayed for some time with earnouts that I have to say is another level of complexity in all of this. Then a company where I chaired the board, where I was involved from acquisition through to exit, with the founding director exiting partway through that investment cycle. And I would say there have been so many lessons learned through those processes. Preparing for sale is certainly something that you really need to plan for. I know that sounds obvious, but in EPM's case, we were very lucky to have several years to do that in advance of the exit. And I think with a full exit, the honest question to ask is around founder dependency. Who really owns those customer relationships? Because those relationships I know in our business were really important. And for us, succession planning early and properly was really important and the key to success. We thought very carefully around our structures, around our decision-making processes, our scheme of delegation, and we consciously moved those key relationships away from the founders long before any potential exit. I think this was all made much easier at EPM because of the earlier management buyout. It certainly laid the foundations for us for an exit. There was no doubt in my mind that founder energy really does build the company, but I learned very quickly that proper business planning, great forecasting, and early succession planning helps to scale it. The preparation that we did for the sale, I have to say, was hard work and it's on top of the day job, but it was so exciting and so enlightening. I learned things about the business that I thought I knew inside out and upside down. I realized what was genuinely robust, and I also realized how much is in the heads of the managers, the directors, and the founders, and it isn't written down. It makes you think about the scalability of your products and services, the competition in the market. And I also had to get to grips with so many financial stats that just hadn't really been important to us running a privately owned business. Perhaps they should have been. Things like revenue sliced and diced by service lines, recurring revenue versus project incomes, margins, client concentration, cash flow, investment requirements. There were so many things that I had to really get my head round. And as much as that area wasn't my forte, that preparation, and I have to say, supported by the most excellent advisors, helped me enormously. And it really made the business much stronger. I also realized that while potential buyers love analyzing the past, they're actually paying for the future. And we're really selling the next 3 to 5 year plan. Our plan had to be racy, it had to be optimistic, but most importantly to me, it had to be grounded in reality. I needed to understand the delivery. It wasn't just about presenting a vision. I had to have complete conviction in the plan and the forecasts. And whilst I had a really strong team around me, I was conscious that the responsibility for delivery was ultimately mine. So, my best advice is to engage great advisors early on, people who really know the education space inside and out. That was really important to me. And also people who you can connect with personally. You'll be working with these advisors for a long time. So, that relationship really matters. And the real skill for me isn't in the exit, as exciting as that part may be. It's in building something strong enough that can carry on without you with the right systems, the right processes, and making sure that the future opportunities are there for the new owners.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up. When I first started learning about how to exit a business or build value in your business so that at one point you can exit, and this was a few years ago now, one concept I really struggled to get my head around was what you just mentioned about actually an investor is looking to buy this plan for the future, these next 3 to 5 years. And I struggled with that so much because in my mind, I was thinking, well, as the founder, this is my baby. And what you want me to do is plan this really exciting trip for my teenager and then let you take my teenager on the trip and I'm not going to go on the trip. It was really hard for me to get my head around. But I'm there. And I just wanted to mention that because I know that there'll be founders who are listening who maybe they didn't realize that. And as a founder, it's something you do have to get your head around. And I think your relationship with your business changes. You know, you might see it as a baby at one point, but then maybe it does become a teenager and maybe it is hard in that sense, just as it is being a parent to a teenager. But then your relationship changes again. And while it's still a part of you, you sort of separate yourself. And I think you have to be in that space to be able to understand that particular concept. Another thing that you mentioned is succession planning. I'd love to know, like, for anyone who doesn't understand, what does succession planning look like? So, who needs to be succeeded? What would you have in place to have a good succession plan?
I totally understand why you struggled with that, Claire, and I genuinely think it's the hardest part of running a business. As a founder, you're a really big part of your business, obviously, but the business also becomes a big part of you, and letting go is never going to be easy. So I totally get that. It took me a long time to get my head around succession planning. Succession planning is partly by design, but it's also taking a leap of faith. And one thing that I've learned is that different people have been right for our business at different stages of its journey, and that's okay. It can feel really awful when someone leaves the business, someone senior. It can feel personal, especially if you thought that colleague was with you for the long term. Now, you have to turn that around and turn it around quickly because often actually it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring in someone with a different perspective or to promote internally and inject new energy, new skills, or new focus for a new phase of growth. And I don't love the phrase skin in the game, but that concept has been really powerful for me. Being able to offer equity to our key members of the team made a real difference to our succession planning at EPM. It helped secure the right people, it helped align incentives, and also to bring the next layer of leadership through. It was about empowerment and trust, but also about accountability. And when I say accountability, I mean both emotional and financial accountability. Now, at EPM, we employ around 200 people, and many of our leadership roles have been filled internally over the years. Supporting people through their careers really matters to me. And the beauty of a growing business is that you don't always have to wait for a vacancy. You can create those opportunities when the right person comes along at the right stage for them. And at EPM, we've had an unusually high number of our leavers that have returned to EPM over the years. We call them EPM boomerangs. They've realised that the grass isn't always greener. I guess a bit like I did in my early stages of my career. And I really welcome that, and I welcome them back with open arms. That little bit of time away also acts as a reset and also brings a new perspective to our business. Now, I'm not sure if many of you use the 9-box grid, but that's been a tool that's been really useful for us in succession planning. Not as a corporate tick box, but more of a way of just having open and honest conversations about performance and about potential. It's really helped us think deliberately about careers and leadership depth across the organisation. Now, lastly, I'd say whatever the structure you've got, it must work internally, but it's also got to look secure and stable from the outside. Any buyer or investor will want to see that your team has the breadth, the depth, and the resilience. So you just need to make sure that there isn't one single point of failure. So in our business, we've made responsibilities clearer. We've added financial targets alongside those softer measures that we used previously. We've created roles where there were gaps, and we've also made sure that every area of the business has an owner. None of that happens overnight. It's quite a long process. And it was all part of our longer term plan to build something that could thrive beyond one or two people in the business.
I haven't heard of the 9-box grid, so I'm going to go away and do some research on that. Thank you very much. That's really, really useful. You said that you have promoted quite a lot of people internally to become leaders. We also have done that actually. We found those leaders to be more successful actually than the leaders that we've brought in. And I think part of that is probably sector knowledge and maybe where they have come from from a teaching background, for example, in the first place, rather than coming in and trying to understand the sector, which I know is a bit different for you. As you do, promote internally people to leadership, what would you say are the key things that you're looking for to be able to create opportunities for your colleagues to grow in your organisation? What kind of skills are you looking for? What kind of attitudes? What is it that makes you think, oh yeah, this is somebody who would be great to create an opportunity for? Or is it something completely different? Have I got it completely wrong?
Well, I was actually just checking back, and around 80% of our leaders in their positions at EBM today have arrived in those jobs due to an internal promotion. And I do agree with you, Claire. The education sector is special, and that context is really important. We know at EPM that a wrong hire can be very damaging. Internal hires definitely feel safer, but I do also think you need to balance with an external perspective at various points of the growth journey. And I always say that although we're not working directly with children, our advice and guidance impacts on educational outcomes, and we take that part of our role really seriously. It would be so easy for us to promote people just because they're technically brilliant at their current job. And we have done that previously. But I think we see across all industries, being the top subject matter expert doesn't automatically make for a great and inspiring people leader. Expertise is really vital for us in our roles at EPM. For example, supporting in complicated HR casework or looking at a very difficult HMRC inquiry from a payroll perspective. But we have built great induction plans and training programs to help with that knowledge. And I've always placed far more emphasis on character, contribution to our culture, and living and breathing our values as a promotion criteria. So, although I would say internal promotions have been really important to the growth of EPM, I've also learned that external perspective is important in a growing business, and it can be really quite limiting if everyone has only ever seen one version of the business. Our external leaders bring us new skills, they bring us a different experience, and also just see things through a slightly different lens. That's important. My business partner and co owner of EPM, Andy, is a really great example of this. He's come from a much larger organisation with significant scale and structure, but still with an education background, which was really important to me. Now, he's introduced another level of operational discipline at EPM and ways of working that have really helped us to understand our metrics and to scale and to grow. And we needed that fresh approach. We didn't have that internally. Although we invest in a very structured leadership training program, right from apprentices through to senior leaders, we've got formal appraisals like you'd expect us to have as an HR business. We have coaching for our staff. I always say that people need to drive their own careers and be really quite demanding. And I love it when people are brave enough to really put themselves forward, to take a risk, to ask why and to constantly challenge and to push what feels comfortable for them. I think that's possibly the best sign for me of someone who'll make a really good leader at EPM. But that said, I just don't need everybody to be fiercely ambitious. We definitely need people who are happy doing a brilliant job day in, day out, doing it consistently and doing it well for our schools and trusts.
Because you are a HR business, do you feel the pressure of making sure that your colleagues that come into the business have the right training? Do you feel like everything HR related in your own business has to be like the best, the not perfect, but the best example that you could possibly give? Do you feel that pressure?
The pressure I feel is probably more because we're a people business than because we're an HR business. I learned really quickly that if we don't look after our colleagues well, it shows up in the service that our schools and trusts receive. So culture is really important to us at EPM. It feels quite instinctive to do all we can to create a happy and supportive workplace and to treat people how we would want to be treated ourselves. So a large part of the work we do for schools and trusts is employee relations and casework management, and that's the tough end of HR. Fortunately, internally at EPM, we have very little of that. So we're able to focus on maintaining a strong culture as we grow. Things like getting recruitment right first time, developing our leaders, making sure that we've got strong support for our people. That's something that we've really focused on. We're very lucky to have an exceptional director of people internally too, who really keeps us focused on what matters. We keep a close eye on things like Glassdoor scores. We carry out regular engagement surveys. They give us a really honest and independent view of how people feel about working at EPM. But I would say that our culture comes mainly down to some really basic principles that we stick to. So Andy and I meet every single new starter for a coffee and catch up. We run monthly briefings so everyone in the business understands what's happening through each and every department. And I chair our engagement committee meeting once a month. Now, that gives colleagues a direct voice, and that's something that's really important to me with 200 employees. We're really big on direct feedback, and if something isn't right in the business, I want to hear that straight away, and we want to look at how we can fix it. That's the advice we'd give to our schools and trusts. And I think the worst HR problems stem from inaction or people feeling unable to raise concerns and problems. We also have a lot of fun along the way, and whether that's the legendary EPM summer party or various events or charity events that we run throughout the year, I always find it's great for our people to get some time together outside of the day job. So in summary, I would say we're not perfect. We don't overthink every decision because we're an HR business. But I'd like to think that doing the right thing comes quite naturally to us most of the time. So I hope that answers the question, Claire.
I love that you mentioned connection outside of the day job. We're a remote first company. We've definitely found that the away days are best used when it's more about fun and connection than actual work. When you think about a presentation, you could do that over Teams because we're only getting together, 4 times a year. But the fun that you can have or the conversations that happen because you're doing something non-work related, that's not always something that you can replicate over Teams. So if you're doing it as a people business, then we must be on the right track. So yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you. Jen, I just want to say thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your insights. It's been super helpful. And just to close, I'd love to know, what do you think we haven't talked about that we should have talked about that education business owners need to know?
I totally agree, Claire. I think Teams has got its place, but there's nothing like getting the team together face to face to form those great relationships and to make people really feel part of the organisation. So we've probably covered quite a lot already, but I'll just end with 3 thoughts in relation to education businesses. And the first one is staying relevant. Education is a sector where everyone's being asked to do more with less. And as far as I can see, that's not going away, with the white paper, etc. So for business leaders, it's about constantly reassessing what you do, how you do it, and being prepared to reinvent products, services, and just make sure that they are relevant in the context of what's going on around us. Now, secondly, I would say relationships really do matter. The education sales cycle, as we know, can be long, and it takes a long time to build trust. So you have to be patient and focus on the value that your organisation brings, not just quickly closing that deal. I think schools today are doing far more than just education. They're supporting a whole range of wide issues in society. And you've really got to understand the pressures that schools are under, not just financially, but emotionally as well in some of those complex issues that they're taking on. And lastly, I would say as a business owner, we sometimes worry too much about our competitors. I've come to realise that doing the right thing and being professionally generous pays dividends. So collaborating with other business leaders in the sector and helping others with their career journey, that feels good and it brings benefit to the sector overall. I don't think any one business in education has all of the answers. So being honest, being open, working together for the sake of the schools and trusts you work with definitely makes a big difference. Now, our new network, the Network for Educational Excellence, NEDEX, we formed that last year, and it brings together not just school leaders, but also education businesses in a collaborative way to bring the very best products and services and thought leaderships to schools and trusts. And it's my best example of bringing those 3 points together, of staying relevant, the power of relationships, and collaboration in education. So overall, and to conclude, I would say it's a challenging sector, but it's been a real privilege to have spent 30 years working with schools and trusts, solving some of their most challenging and complicated people issues. So thanks so much for having me, Claire. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.